Welcome, everyone, to Do the Work series with the Educators Room. I am your host, Francesca Warren. It is a cold day in the state of Georgia, but we are here with Dr. Keith TD and Dr. Katherine Wright. We are so excited to have them. We guys know that we've been focusing a lot more on research and bringing evidence-based practices into the conversation that we have about education. And so when I was sent this study, Drawing to Improve Metacomprehension Accuracy, last year, I was really intrigued by it. So giving you guys a little bit of background, we asked our readers to what was the research that really guided them this last year in 2022, and this was a study that was sent to us. So before we talk about it, can you guys introduce yourselves, your background, and then we'll start with how you guys even got into wanting to talk about metacomprehension and drawing.
Sure thing. Thanks so much. So my name is Dr. Katherine Wright. I'm a former middle school English and social studies teacher. I got certified in social studies way back in the day and then realized that many social studies teachers had to do some sort of sports and I couldn't do that. So I also became certified in English so that I would be more marketable, and really found that when I was teaching social studies, it was really just teaching English through a very specific lens. And I became really interested in this idea of how do we support students' disciplinary literacy? How do we help them read, write, and think like field experts? And how might that start to close some of those opportunity gaps that we know really exist in our system? So my research really focuses on developing strategies to engage our students, support them, and motivate them, because it's one thing if we teach them to read and write, but if they never want to do it again, we haven't really accomplished much. And having worked with middle school students who are reluctant at a lot of things, that's really my passion. I love it when a kid says, I hate to read. I'm like, great, challenge accepted. Let's go. Let's find a way around this. So I really work to deepen our understanding of disciplinary literacy, specifically how helping them read and write can really, move them forward and get them into those conversations. Get them into the STEM fields and things like that.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Keith TD. I'm a professor at Boise State. I thought one of us should broadcast that. Give a shout out to Boise State. I was a former high school math teacher, and I just kind of put that past me once I got into the doctoral program and got turned on to educational psychology, and really started finding a lot of enjoyment doing research on comprehension and comprehension monitoring, which is really what I've focused on my entire career. So I've worked a lot to try to develop and evaluate approaches that help students more accurately assess their own learning. And the reason it's important and the reason I've enjoyed it is that we've also done research that shows that how well a person can differentiate what they know and don't know leads to better decisions about what to study and restudy. And that's been linked to higher overall reading. So monitoring accuracy is kind of the fundamental building block in the kind of self-regulated learning. And I've enjoyed doing research in that space forever.
That's really interesting. And Dr. TD, I didn't realize you were a math teacher, and Dr. Wright, I didn't realize you were an English teacher. So this is really interesting from that perspective. So can you guys talk about how you guys even got into this study? What was the trigger point to say, this might be something that we can dig into and learn more about?
You want me to, before we get too far, Dr. Warren, I thought it might be good to just help everyone get their heads around metacomprehension, like what it is and why you should care about it, because it's a small little audience. This is kind of comical that this is going to so many people when I think Katherine and I are used to having like dozens of people read what we do, and so to have this large an audience, I'm going to really try to convince everybody that they should start getting very into metacomprehension. So kidding, I'll do my best. I won't make any promises, but the standard procedure and what we did in this study to gather data on metacognitive monitoring is you basically you give students some things to read. you ask them to predict how well they'll do on a test, and then you give them a test, right? And that accuracy is really, it's just the relationship between how well they predicted and how well they actually did. So it's the relationship between predicted and actual performance. And it's just monitoring accuracy in the metacog world. In the early 80s, Mackey and Barry did a study. They did the first study in this space, and they called it metacomprehension, and the term stuck. And so metacomprehension is just monitoring accuracy. But what it really just describes is how well do students differentiate what they know from what they don't know? Does that make sense? And so a student that does this really well not only can tell you what they know and don't know, they're right about that. Students that struggle, and most students do struggle, the stuff that they think they understood well, they may or may not. The things they didn't think they understood particularly well, they may or may not have. And it's from college age on down, this is a real struggle for people. People struggle to know what they know and struggle to know what they don't know. And so, and it's typically metacomprehension accuracy is defined as a correlation. And so any value close to 1 is really great accuracy. And so in this study, I was telling Katherine, that 0.8 that we got, that is insanely high accuracy. And the fact that we could do it with 5th graders and we can't even replicate that with college students is pretty amazing. So accuracy is really important. And the reason it's important is if you can't tell what you don't know, you make really ineffective decisions about what to restudy. So imagine you're trying to regulate the temperature of your house, and it's about 20 degrees here. So I'm not sure if that's really cold in Georgia yet, but here in Idaho, it's 20. It's really cold. And if I'm trying to regulate the temperature in my room here, and my thermostat is broken, I might not be able to get the temperature where I want it because my room it's not monitoring what the temperature really is. And that's kind of where we are with metacomprehension accuracy. It's, can you tell what you don't know? And then if you restudy that, you actually get really high levels of comprehension as well. And so that's my sales pitch for getting everyone to get into metacomprehension and everyone to think it's really important. How did I do?
You did excellent. I was going to say, so I first encountered metacomprehension while I was in graduate school working on my doctorate, and I had a faculty member. It was a course on learning theories. And at the beginning of like the 3rd week, she said, okay, we're going to do a quick comprehension check. And, I had done all the readings. I had listened to the lectures. I felt, oh, all right. And she said, well, I felt pretty confident. She said, we're not going to collect this. And just asked something very basic, like, write down what you remember about X. And it was a topic that we had discussed at length the week before. And I got out my pencil and I put it, and nothing could come out. Right. And this is a really common experience with students, that they're very familiar with a topic. Like, they kind of remember talking about it, and heck, they might even remember what color your shirt was that day. And because they have memories from the lesson, they feel like they understand it. But being familiar and understanding are 2 very different things. And this is a trick I still use I use now as an instructor with doctoral students when we have particularly complex content. And really my goal is just to let them know, like, no, you don't get it yet. You need to spend more time with this. But if even at the doctoral level, where we're assuming that people are really engaged and dedicating a lot of time and energy, and they have the study skills, if they're still not doing it well, how can we expect our K-12 students to be strong in metacomprehension if we don't, and metacognition if we're not providing that support? So I think we got into this. I was trying to go back in time. We first started playing when I first started at Boise State. This is my 7th year. Keith sent me an email right after I'd been hired and saying, hey, I'm working on this project. And I'll be honest, at first I just thought he was being nice to the new person. And so I started looking into this work, this idea of can we have kids use drawings to help support their metacognition, metacomprehension? And prior to my getting this job during my doctoral work, I had done some studies where we evaluated the graphics in science texts. We looked at texts that were used for bilingual education in Qatar, looked at some of the science and social studies books available in the United States to see, well, what kind of images are there here? Are kids using these images? And how are teachers teaching students to read these visuals? So I had looked at visuals from the publication side of things, but not at, well, how can we use that to help children engage with the text and demonstrate their understanding?
We've been virtual for 3 years and still go on mute. It's so interesting when you guys talked about that, and especially the definition of metacomprehension and just how people retain information, because there's a battle in K-12 right now. I call it a battle. Not sure if that's the appropriate word, where teachers are saying, I'm teaching this. The kids are, they're engaged in class, they're doing this. And then the kids can't regurgitate or can't show that they've learned it. And so this idea around metacomprehension and drawing and all of this, I think it has a definite place as we think about how we evolve our teaching skills or whatnot. What did you, as you guys were doing this and you're thinking about doing this study, what were some of the things that you came in with that you just knew would be proven, or you thought would be proven, or hypothesized would be proven?
Can I go with this one, Katherine?
Yeah, go for it.
So for me, all of the interventions that I've done that have shown to improve metacomprehension accuracy have really, all they're doing is telling students, this is what I mean as a researcher. This is what I mean for you to comprehend something. And it's, I couldn't figure out why seventh graders, when I got a grant to study metacomprehension with seventh graders, and their accuracy was just horrid, like beyond awful. It was like negative, like the things they thought they understood, they did worse on those tests, right? And it was terrible. And it finally got to a point where I was so frustrated by it, I actually started throwing different kinds of test questions on. And it helped me realize that seventh graders don't think of comprehension the way a writing researcher would, or how I thought about it, like connecting ideas in a text. They thought of comprehension as pulling facts out of a text. So it's like, how well could you remember the facts? That's what they were monitoring. And so a lot of my attention for that grant changed and became, this is what I mean by comprehension. This is what I want you to judge. How well can you connect the ideas? I don't care about, can you remember the definition of this or this tidbit of, this little factoid. It became about comprehension. And so all of the interventions that we've done with seventh graders, and they're just replicating what we've done with college students, really is telegraphing, this is what I mean by comprehension. It's not about extracting facts. It's about connecting ideas. And that's where I had read some of Katherine's work about these organizational versus representational textbook figures. And it becomes really obvious that if you can train a fifth grader or anybody to think about the organization, it really is, that's comprehension, right? These representational drawings or representational text probably might very well help you remember facts, but they don't help you make that big picture and draw that big cognitive map of what this thing is about. And so my working assumption was, and my hypothesis was, that if you teach kids how to do these organizational drawings, their metacomprehension has to improve, because you're telegraphing to them, this is what I care about. Can you connect the ideas with your drawing? Can you connect the ideas? And that was my main hypothesis, that organizational drawings would help them, would improve their metacomprehension accuracy. And I don't even think Katherine and I had to take a beer bet on that. I think she.
No, definitely. Coming from the literacy side of things, so there's been some research done looking at when people from different expert fields approach a text in their field, what are they doing? What are they looking for? And so when we talk about experienced scientists, chemists, physicists, when they're reading a text, they're not just trying to extract discrete facts. They're trying to put together a mental model of what's going on, of a phenomena, of something that's happening in the natural, or in the world. All right. So it's not, and unfortunately, so much of our science education has become that fact-based, and kids really think it's just, can I regurgitate the facts? Especially, and this gets so hard for our elementary teachers, who are in some places allotted 30 minutes a week for science class, 45 minutes a week for science class. And so how do we get kids to really think about science as systems and interrelated parts and processes? So when we talk about representational versus organizational drawings, a representational drawing would be something like just picking out some pieces from the text. So in the article, we've got an example, but excuse me. So to contrast that, a more organizational one will show how these different pieces interact. So as an example, one of the texts we had children read and make drawings about was about a theory about how the Earth's moon was formed. And in this reading, it says that, well, one theory is that there was an asteroid that hit the Earth, and a lot of dust and particle came out, and it kind of got all caught up together, and Earth's gravity eventually formed the moon. And so that the moon is really based upon matter from Earth. So the kids who did a representational drawing, this is fifth graders. So what piece of that did they cling on to? An asteroid hit the Earth. So they drew a picture of the Earth being hit by an asteroid, and that was a representation of something from the text. But the kids who did the organizational drawings had things like, they'd still have that Earth with the asteroid hitting, but then they'd have like dust particles floating up and kind of like going into some swirly thing to become the moon. And a lot of them, they'd have arrows showing like the process of how this happened. They might have arrows going around the Earth to show, how gravity is helped create the orbit of the moon. All right, so they had more pieces of it. And so they demonstrated deeper understanding than the kids who just kind of clung on to that exciting bit that an asteroid might have hit the Earth. And so the kids who did those organizational drawings really demonstrated better comprehension of the text, like the big takeaways that you would want a child to extract from that text, not just that at some point perhaps an asteroid hit the Earth.
I made a mark as I marked up the article, and this idea that you guys have you actually had three groups, right? Mm-hmm. You had a group that drew representational, and then organizational, and then you had one that didn't draw anything, right?
Correct.
So can you talk about, because as a teacher, I'm listening to this, and we have some comments where they're talking about drawing never really comes from scratch. It really is a process of how a kid thinks and expresses himself. And we could have plenty of words related to any drawing made by kids. What this idea of, can you go a little bit into it? Like, what does this look like for a teacher, like this organizational group, this representational group? Because the way I think about it with representational is, if I'm trying to get kids to understand how a bill is passed, how a law is passed, then mm-hmm. I'm going to, organizationally, I'm going to show the process. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then so give them a little bit more on, like, what does that look like in class?
Sure. So,
Katherine has a great explanation and description of the organizational. Let me just tell you, the representational, that's the default. Like, if you just tell kids, draw a picture, here, read this science text, and that's what all of our texts were science text. If you just tell them, here, read this text on how the moon was formed and draw a picture of it, you get a kind of a classic representational drawing with maybe some UFOs and some aliens and some other cool stuff that decided to put in there. They're not related to anything other than their own imagination, but that's the default. And so that for a teacher, the task is not, can you get kids to draw representational drawings? That they seem to do that very naturally. It's more how do you actually move the kids to start drawing organizational drawings? And that's what Katherine did a great job with. And so she'll give us the overview on that, right?
Yeah, well, so this really came from my experience as a writing teacher. So I approached, how am I going to teach children to make organizational drawings the same way I would teach them to write in any genre? Because at the end of the day, and I think someone was saying, talking about this idea of like kids creating and like using all these different words, like the process of creation and that creativity, writing and drawing have a lot of overlap. So I took a step back and said, okay, well, if I was trying to teach children to write in a new genre, what would I do? Well, first I'd show them models, right? And then so we got we took some of the organizational sketches from our first study, the really strong ones, and we would read a text and we looked at the organizational drawings and we talked about how does this really demonstrate that the person who made the drawing understood the text? What elements are there? I also showed them non-examples and identify them as non-examples. All right, this is not really showing me that the student understood. Why not? And we really had conversations about that. So the next step again, if I was teaching a genre, is say, well, let's start to define this genre. What makes this genre this genre? So what makes a good scientific drawing a good scientific drawing? And allow the students to come to the point that they started talking about, okay, well, it had different steps. It showed how things interacted. And, this was fifth graders. So they pulled out a lot of like very kind of explicit elements, that there are arrows, right? And they started to realize like how arrows can show a process, which was great because previous research has shown that children don't always understand what arrows mean in visuals. They generally think it's just pointing to something important, not necessarily that's showing steps in a process. And if you think about something like the water cycle, right, we assume that children know that those arrows in the water cycle are showing steps, like one to the next. But actually, a lot of times they just think it's pointing to an important part. So they started talking about like, well, how do the arrows show the different steps in this process? And then we talked about, well, what would be your process if you've done this reading and you're trying to show your understanding? What are you going to be? What are you going to do? And so it was really student-led as they came up with like, well, I first need to identify what the steps are, or, in the process from the text. And I need to decide which ones I'm going to include in my drawing. And they really came up with that process. And so with our the research you're talking about actually has two studies. And that second study is when we really, we've had this more in-depth lesson. And so the students came up with the process for how to create an organizational drawing. And so they had that as like an anchor chart to reference. And we used their words to explain, this is how we need to do this. But very much any of your viewers who teach writing, I approach this the same way I would teach writing. And I am not an artist. I want to be clear that when I was, we all got to, and I think that was important for the students too. Like, this is not about having a beautiful drawing. Stick figures are fine, right? And they needed to know that because I didn't want them to get too into the like beauty of it. I mean, some of them are great and they have that, but you don't need to be an artist to teach kids how to draw. If you can write, you can draw to this level.
This is fascinating. Dr. TD, you said something that really caught my eye. Is like you used all science text with this. So that to me is really important because as we know as practitioners, is that those science texts and those social studies texts a lot of times are really difficult. What was the reasoning behind that piece?
I've always just used scientific text because they have a really clear causal chain, like this causes this, which causes this, which causes this. And so in writing test questions that try to tap into whether students can see and connect ideas, that causal chain is really, really important in terms of like being able to write good questions that tap into that, rather than just facts. And so I've always just used scientific text, mostly because I've had colleagues that have played in that space, both at Illinois when I was there, and here we had two of the authors are science teachers. Katherine has done a lot of work in science, and so it was easy to find collaborators to help generate these texts and write test questions that tap into not the facts, right? Not the details, but can you actually connect the ideas? And so I've used science, just not always. I did some things where it was about causes of inflation and things like that. and the college students really hated those. So I figured 7th and 5th graders would hate them even more. And I'd rather have them read something that they somewhat enjoy than causes of the Revolutionary War or the causes of inflation or why gold prices go up when there's inflation, whatever. So it's just force of habit. How about that for an answer?
Well, so my interest in science text it's totally a rebellion. So growing up when I was young, I totally wanted to be a scientist. Or I wanted to go into medicine. Like I was very science oriented until about early middle school when I started struggling in math. And got, like so many people, like, well, you're good at English and social studies, so don't worry, you go that direction, right? So that de facto tracking of you're going to be a science or an English social studies versus a science and math person definitely happened to me. And it wasn't until I was in graduate school, and I avoided math after that as much as humanly possible until I got to my doctoral program and had to take statistics, and then realized like, oh, wait, when it's applied, and I have the time to study and I have the resources, I'm actually pretty good at this. So this is my rebellion now, that I am now trying to make it clear that no, actually that critical thinking that's important for reading and writing actually really has a place in science, is needed in science. If you're not communicating your findings as a scientist, then you're a mad scientist in a lab. You're not actually engaging in the scientific community. So that's where my interest comes from.
And this has gotten my, me thinking about this, because as educators are watching this, and they can replay this anytime, just this idea of going into work this week and thinking about how ideas relate to one another. Mm-hmm. I think that within itself is kind of, especially in this, we've come out of this, I don't mean we've come out of it, but this whole idea of testing is answering multiple choice questions and high stakes testing. And so this idea that no, it's how something relates to something, that can y'all speak a little bit about that? Because for some teachers, you might be certified, emergency certified, and you're just trying to regurgitate information. This is learning, and this is how I learn. But talk about this idea of in relationship to, because that's something there too.
Well, and I think I would encourage teachers, and I remember being a new teacher and terrified of those tests at the end of the year, right? Like, no matter what your admin says about like, oh, it doesn't matter, or I don't know if anyone's saying that, but if they are, that it's somehow going to reflect on you. And so there's this fear-based instruction almost to focus on what are the discrete skills and things that students are going to need. I remember when I was teaching in Texas, the writing exam that was limited to like 25 lines of text. So I was being encouraged to never let my students write more than 25 lines because on the test, they're not going to be able to. Well, that's not authentic writing. And I think when we're talking about comprehension of content, be it science, social studies, whatever, there's this fear-based that like, I need to make sure that they can regurgitate all the facts. But I'd really push that if your students understand the process, they're going to do better on the multiple choice test because they have a better idea of the whole picture. You can't teach every discrete fact. It's just not possible. Not for every core subject and every standard. But if you get them to be able to think about the content, they're going to be able to make more reasonable guesses and fill in the blanks of their own understanding. So I think that's really what we need to be trying to push towards. And I know, and I say this understanding that I'm functioning in a perfect world, we could do it this way. And most teachers are not in that situation. But the more you can push to really focus on those bigger picture, the connection between ideas versus rote memorization of facts, I do think your students are going to do better.
And I will, just to piggyback on that, I do think, for many educators, the standardized test and all that, it's kind of the bane of what, it's like, oh, yikes, I don't want to think about that. I will say that when they started developing the smarter balance assessments and things like that, there was a real attempt, maybe not as strong as we would have liked, but there was a real attempt to move, maybe not move away from remembering facts and like extracting facts from text, but at least there were questions that were really about causal change, like a little bit of a higher order. And there was some metacognitive questions about, if somebody thought about this text this way, would they be right to be thinking about it that way? So there is some higher level testing, even in the standardized test now, which is at least from compared to what it looked like, in the 90s, that is like the fact that there's any of that is a real improvement. And I do think that people often will think I can't focus on the comprehension because there still are detailed questions, right? My research has shown that if you can get it's pretty hard to connect ideas of the text if you don't remember the ideas. So working on connecting the ideas actually allows them to focus on the details too. It's not like it's an either or. It's think about comprehension because you get the boost on both ends. You get the comprehension, but you also get, guess what? If the ideas are connected, they can remember those little bits of ideas better than they could when they were these isolated things that didn't go together in any kind of meaningful way. And so the big global picture, the comprehension part, actually helps them remember the details, the facts that make up that article or that passage that they read.
That's so interesting, all of this. And I guess one of the questions that I have, because we've already been talking 30 minutes and we could talk about this all day. Walk our readers through like how you guys set up the study and what were some of the surprises that you found? Like, were there surprises? Was your hypothesis right? I know the answer because I've read the study, but for many people on here, they haven't. But how did you set this up and why did you set it up the way that you did? And, go from there.
Keith, do you want me to take this or do you want to?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So, and I know some of this we've kind of said, but, our goal is really to see if students could use the cues from their drawings, like if they could judge whether or not they made a good drawing and use that to say, okay, do I understand the text? So in our first study, what we did is we broke 60 students up into 2 groups and provided them with some very basic instructions. So the organizational group in that study, they read a scientific text aloud as a class and they were shown a model. And we just said look, this is good because it connects things. And that was about it. And then they were independently provided with another reading. It was taken from a 5th grade textbook. We checked for readability level and all of that to make sure that it was appropriate for the students. And then they read the text, they created a drawing, and then we just asked them, if you were to take a 5-question multiple choice quiz on this reading, how many would you get correct? And they judged their comprehension from 0 to 5. And then they turned all those materials into us, and then they got a 5-question multiple choice assessment. And we repeated that over once a week over 5 weeks. The other group, everything was the same, except in the representational group, they were shown a model of a representational drawing and just told, look, this is a good drawing because it's got a lot of stuff in it. And I think we used the technical term stuff just to really make sure that they understood what we were saying. And in this process, the students who did the organizational drawings, they did outperform on the comprehension tests, and they were also much better at predicting their performance. So then we came back the following year and said, okay, well, what's the next step? Well, we wanted to have a comparison group just to say well, what happens if kids just read a text, judge their comprehension, and take the test? So no drawing whatsoever. We kept the representational group exactly how it was the time before. And then the organizational group got that more in-depth instruction. So it was a lesson that I think it probably took about 90 minutes one time where I came in with that organizational group and really walked them through the process of creating a good scientific drawing the same way that we would teach them how to write in a specific genre. And then we repeated the process over 5 weeks with 5 different texts. And this is what Keith was talking about earlier. Again, that organizational group really outperformed both the representational group and the control group on the comprehension, but their metacomprehension accuracy was about 0.8, so about 80%. which, as Keith said, and Keith has done this research for a long time, like never have we seen that kind of accuracy, and especially out of children this young. So there's really a lot of excitement there that like kids can do this.
I think, Francesca, the surprise for me really was how natural representational drawing. I mean, that was like we could have gone in and just said, yeah, just draw whatever you want, and they would have drawn a representational drawing, because that's what they do. And it was really interesting, with just because I knew I had the really good teacher, Katherine, teaching the organizational thing. I know about as much about fifth graders as I do about my two kids that have been fifth graders at one time. So I was a bit nervous about going in and teaching fifth grade students how to draw representational drawings. I managed to pull it off, even though I'm a high school math teacher. So, but it really was. I had the easy job on that because it was just kind of go do what you would naturally do, versus what Katherine had to convince them to do, which was a whole lot of work.
Well, and I think that really comes from the fact that in my previous work, looking at a lot of the images in their science textbooks, it's getting better, but a lot of the images in science textbooks for elementary students are very just representational. Like we're not getting really complex drawings that show models that are showing students how we should be thinking about these concepts. So I guess I was a little bit less shocked that they drew all these representational ones, simply because we know they're not really paying attention to most of the images in their textbooks, but if they are paying attention, this is what they're seeing, even if they haven't really thought about it all that explicitly.
Wow. And you know, that 0.8%, I think we really should like land on that, because that's huge. Have you seen that type of accuracy with other studies, or like what do you think brought it that high?
Yeah, I mean, just for reference, if you ask college students, you give college students a bunch of text to read, have them predict how they'll do, and give them a test. The really standard, it is remarkable how the several different meta-analyses have been done. The control condition is always, and I kid you not, always, in all three studies, it's 0.27. So a correlation of 0.27 for college students, for seventh graders. For fifth graders, ours was not quite that high, but that is, it tells you how difficult this task is. It tells you why people often study ineffectively, because we're not very good. And I'll lump myself in this because I'm not very good at this, because I don't draw pictures of everything that I've written. But I'm going to draw one about this article after this meeting, just so I can tell whether I understood it or not. Kidding. But the whole idea of doing interventions to try to get people to understand that comprehension is connecting the ideas I did my original work in this in the early 2000s and got accuracy to about 0.6, 0.63, 0.65, 0.7, never this high, never even close. And the good news is, while the 0.8 is fantastic, what you find is the difference between having accuracy of 0.7 and having accuracy of 0.25, when you look at how the decisions that students are making about what to restudy, the high accuracy means they're actually focusing on the right text. And when you look at overall comprehension, it's like 3 grades. It's like 30% better comprehension for the group that actually studied effectively by looking at rereading text that they didn't understand and not bothering to reread text that they actually already understood. But that's where the accuracy really helps, because if you don't know what you didn't know, you might as well just randomly select text. And sometimes it's a waste of your time because you already knew it. And other times it actually is helpful. But what we've found in 3 different studies is students, regardless of the age, students know to study what they don't know. It's just they don't know what they don't know. And so the monitoring is this pivotal thing that you have to focus. You have to get them focused on comprehension. And once you get that accuracy, and I don't know what the magic number is. There was a time when I was thinking that would be so cool to figure out what's that tipping point. I lost patience in trying to design studies to do that. But 0.6 versus 0.25, there is a huge difference in performance when you do that. The 0.8 is just like, holy moly, that is off the charts accurate. And the beauty is they didn't have to be that accurate necessarily, but I think part of what it does, the other interventions that I've done are doing things like having kids write summaries. And I can, here's my summary, right? I versus a picture where you actually look at it and go, boy, I clearly didn't understand what that was. Like at a glance, you can look at that, a drawing, and say, that's got some stuff there. I think that I might have understood this one okay. And that's really what we're asking them to do, right? Draw a picture. And if they struggle to draw that organizational picture in particular, it's a cue that they didn't understand what they read. If they could draw a good picture, a nice organizational drawing, it should be very reassuring to the student that they understood what they read, because look at that picture. It has all this information in it. And so really what we're trying to do with this intervention, or any of these interventions, is help the students identify the text they really understood and the ones they didn't. And I think visually, those two, one that you understood and one that you didn't understand, that really pops visually, in sharp contrast to a summary, which is a bunch of words on a page, right? So I think that's probably why it was so effective. The drawing, I don't know if you could get college students to draw pictures. Like they might think they're too cool to do that. But that's something we could try, I suppose. But it works really well. I mean, the kids were into the drawing. I mean,
and I think. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I was going to say too. I think part of this is that if you ask children to respond, demonstrate their understanding, even if it's a multiple choice question or writing summaries or anything that's involving reading and writing, you are also testing their reading and writing skills, period. Right. So they might really understand a lot of the content, but maybe they just don't have the writing fluency and stamina to write out a full summary. Right. They're going to leave out details because they just don't want to, or they're going to stress out over whether or not they spelled a word correctly, or, things like that. I think the beauty of the drawings is that it really alleviates a lot of those language demands, but allows you to see what do the children know and what do they not know. So, one of the things Keith and I have talked about for years is like, all right, well, now how do we start taking this to teachers? Saying rather than having your students read a passage and write a summary, which, let's be honest, the teacher does not want to read 25 summaries of the same text over and over and over again. Like, I've been there. We've all been there. It's not fun. If you know how to evaluate the drawings, if you've taught the students how they should be doing these drawings, that's a much better way to start being able to monitor your students' understanding of the content and to be able to really identify where misconceptions are. Because a lot of times if children are writing, if they don't understand something, they're just not going to talk about it. Whereas you might see in a drawing like, oh, wait, you've connected this thought and this thought, but that's not quite right. And that allows the teacher to know where to reteach and where to spend their time and energy. So I think in addition to supporting the students being able to monitor their comprehension, I really think there's potential here for teachers to be able to monitor their students' comprehension in a way that also alleviates a little bit of that grading burden, which we all know takes way too much time.
And I think one of the themes that I keep hearing is this idea of learning and not just like completion, like not just getting them to do it just because.
It's not an assessment. It's or not a summative assessment. Like use it to continue teaching and learning.
Yeah. One of the things you hit on, and I was actually going to ask you guys this, like, what do you feel like the next steps are for teachers who are listening to this who say, oh, wow, I want to learn how. How do you train teachers to do this type of work in addition to what they're already doing?
I do think Katherine's description in the second study is actually clear enough. Like I understood from just what we wrote in that article, okay, I'll be the first to admit I'm not going to go into a fifth grade classroom and teach organizational drawing, but I could at least I could take a reasonably good approximation of what Katherine did and make that happen. Um, I do think just in agreement with what Katherine said. I think the likelihood of a teacher actually assigning summaries, knowing that they're going to have to read 25 really poorly written summaries is almost zero, right? I got a huge kick out of looking at the drawings when we were coding these things. And it's not like I didn't enjoy reading summaries. Okay, I didn't. But looking at these drawings, it's like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. They actually connected things with prior knowledge that it wasn't even in the text, right? They're just drawing extra stuff to make their pictures better. And they were fun to look at. And as a teacher, I think I could set up my 25 students drawings, and I could tell you, let's put them in buckets. Which kids really got it? Here's these drawings. Which kids, I don't even know what they're thinking. That's illustrated with these drawings, and it would help me a ton to like just look at those drawings. It would take virtually no time at all and be able to actually sit down in a small group and say, let's talk about this article. Let's talk about your drawings and let's work through some of this. And I think as a tool for helping teacher, kind of a formative assessment, as using the drawings as a formative assessment to help a teacher work with kids to help them better understand things, the drawings were exponentially better than a summary. I mean, it was just like so much fun for me as a researcher, hopefully as a teacher, but also just really informative because you can tell the difference, just like the kids could tell you this, their drawings between a good drawing and a bad drawing, or not such a clear drawing. A teacher could do that just as well, and I think it'd be a really powerful approach for helping them teach the science texts better.
Well, and I think in the article, we do have the sample drawings, like not an example and a non-example that is what we used in the actual lesson. And, showing that to the students and talking about the differences. And I also want to say that this didn't take very long. And I think there were some children who, if we had given them the entire school day to draw, they would have kept drawing. But for the most part, they created these in 10 to 15 minutes, which I don't know a fifth grader who can write a solid paragraph summary in 10 to 15 minutes. That's just more time. There's not enough time because there's so many other cognitive processes that have to go into that. They're thinking about, well, a paragraph means 5 sentences, right? Or can I do 6 sentences? All those little decisions that really interfere with them being able to show their knowledge. The drawings, I think it's a bit more natural. And I do think that you could probably get older students to do this if you explain to them the purpose. If you just ask them to draw, I think they're going to sit there and say, well, this is like, what are they, how old does she think I am? Right? That kind of thing. But if you explain to them why they're doing this, that, this is a way to model scientific thinking and knowledge, and that scientists use models, and making them understand that this is a way that a scientist would engage with their community, well, then it's not like a little kid thing to do. And I say that, though, as someone who loved to get glue and glitter out with 8th graders, because they still enjoy being, having that opportunity to be creative as part of their learning.
This is so interesting to me. We have about 13 minutes left, and I have to ask, you had your findings from this study. What would be the next if you got this $1 million grant to continue this work, right? What does this look like? What would be the next piece that you would dig deep into?
I think first, Keith and I we have a lot of ideas. And so there would be a fight as to which idea reigns supreme. But I think kind of leaning more into this piece that we've kind of been hypothesizing here at the end, that this could really be a great formative assessment tool for teachers, and really looking into, I taught the lesson. If a teacher teaches in their own classroom, we were in a real school, but anytime you bring in a researcher, it's a bit inauthentic. They knew me or they didn't know me. They were excited by a new person. Maybe they paid more attention. I'm not going to pretend none of those things came into play. Right. So what happens when teachers do this in their own classrooms and then start to try to judge the drawings themselves? Can they start to, as Keith was saying, really say like, yeah, this is the bucket of kids who understood it. Here's the bucket of kids who didn't. And can I start to identify some of those misconceptions? We hypothesize that it's doable. We look at the drawings now that we have spent a lot of time looking at a lot of drawings and say like, yeah, it's totally possible to see this, but what does that really look like in a real classroom with the real constraints of a real classroom? Not when a researcher's coming in and, handing out free pencils or, that kind of stuff.
I do the really the missing link in this study was and it's due to time constraints, right? I mean, we went in, we did a text a week for 5 weeks. The real benefit for improving a student's metacognitive monitoring is they're going to make better decisions about what they need to restudy. And then we didn't test that, right? I mean, the comprehension gains that we showed in this study, that's due to them processing the text because of the kind of drawing they were doing, right? This didn't include the added bonus gain in comprehension that comes from, by the way, now you're really able to target your rereading in a really effective way. I thought I was really proud of our research team for being able to pull this off at all. Just with the accuracy phase of the study, and the findings were really cool. The regulation phase would mean doing this again and then asking students which of these texts you want to reread, and then doing it again, doing even more. The teachers were fabulously good sports, right? I mean, we went into 3 classrooms and we randomly assigned kids in each of those classrooms to our 3 conditions. And it was like a fire drill at the beginning. Hey, remember, if you're in the organizational, I can't remember what we called them.
I think we just call them 1, 2, and 3. Like,
and they would line up. Right? It was like a fire drill. And they would go out in the halls and they'd all be lined up. It was, the teachers were incredibly good sports about playing along with us and trying to make the research as sound methodologically as we could. But so the thought of doing that phase is not real attractive to me, but maybe one of your viewers would say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do that study and let me know how it turns out. Because that would be the next logical step from a metacognitive perspective, is now give them an opportunity to restudy and see what happens. It's really hard. I did that with 7th grade. In the 7th grade, it is disruptive to the school. It's a mess, but it's really cool when you see the results, and the gain in comprehension was so substantial for the group that could really accurately monitor that it felt like that was well worth that kind of taking 3 days and kind of throwing the classrooms in disarray for 3 days. But teachers they're just as curious as us, anybody that's doing research. And I think the 3 teachers that we worked with were pretty psyched by the results. The principal was pretty psyched by the results. I haven't snuck into their classrooms to see if they're doing organizational drawing anymore, but I'll leave that to Katherine. I'm sure she'll sneak into the schools, right?
Oh, totally. No one cares, right? If you just walk now. Yeah, I really, and I think, Keith, you make a really good point. And because of the rules of research, we can't reveal who those teachers were, but they were amazing. And so if they are ever watching this, we are so grateful for their time and commitment, because we do understand that teachers are being asked to do way too much right now. And so when someone says like, yeah, you can come in and do research, we don't take that lightly. We don't take that for granted. It is so hard for researchers to get into schools and do the research that matters, because teachers have too much going on right now anyway, and principals have too much pressure. And so we are so grateful for when those opportunities arise, that teachers are willing and able to work with us.
And so, teachers, as you're listening to this and you have the study, we put the link on our page for you to try this and to reach out to them and see, like, how did it go and what did you notice and those things. So, we have 7 minutes left. Is there anything from this study that we did not talk about that you're like, well, I've got to say this?
I think we've hit all the main points. We really appreciate getting in front of you and so many other viewers. This is, as I said, our articles sit in journals, and somebody may break them open from time to time. So to have an opportunity to talk to this many people in one sitting is, it's a wonderful opportunity for us. So thank you.
I'd also say just, I think when I was a teacher, on the few times that I got to see research, I kind of assumed that the researchers were just like up in these ivory towers doing their very important things.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how excited I am on the rare occasions I hear from a teacher who says like, oh, your research was interesting. Could you answer some of my questions? Like, I will Zoom with any teacher anywhere, anytime, and talk about, I mean, because that's why I'm a teacher first. I was a classroom teacher first. That's still who I am. And I think I can speak for Keith here too. So not just us, but if you have questions about research, please don't hesitate to reach out to those authors. If they don't reply to you, they're not worth your time. And the rest of us will be so excited to hear that a practitioner saw our work, that we'd love to engage in the conversation.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for coming on and being willing to talk about this research. And one of the things, like for our readers, as you're listening to this, please, please, please reach out to them. They were super helpful. We wanted to interview them. And this is, I feel like as a former teacher, that it's really important for us to learn about what's happening in the field and how does it have an impact on our day-to-day classroom practice. Now, we have 5 minutes left. Can we do a speed round? It'll be fun. No worries. Are you guys ready?
Sure.
As we'll ever be.
Okay, first, 10 seconds to answer. Who were you for the Super Bowl? The Philadelphia Eagles or the Kansas City Chiefs?
Come on, speed round.
Sorry, my household were Steelers fans, so
okay.
I was cheering for the Nachos.
I'm a Viking fan, so I was pulling for the Eagles just because they abused the Vikings during the regular season. So I wanted to make the Vikings look better.
What is one piece of research that you feel like is not your own research, someone else's research, that you feel like is cutting edge and you wish more people knew about?
Ooh.
I love an article. It's a kind of a meta-analysis about teacher judgments, and it's by Sudkamp and some other folks. It's a 2012 article. It just talks about different findings that people have found is how accurately are teachers able to monitor or predict how their students will do. It's kind of like this, but with teachers predicting how their students will do, and this with the same idea, right? That if the teacher can tell who's struggling, they'll go work with them. It's just kind of a cool. I just think it's really cool. So I'll leave it at that. Catherine's got a really cool one too.
No, I had to choose. So 1,000 things, but one thing, there's some work coming out of researchers at George Mason, especially Seth Parsons, on writing engagement in elementary school, and we've been looking at reading motivation and engagement in recent years, but now starting to move more into that. How do we motivate and engage students to write, and coming up with different measures, and also they're looking at what can teachers do with this information? So it's really new. But it's really exciting.
Okay. Last question: cats or dogs?
Cats.
Cats.
Sorry.
You didn't hear my dogs barking?
No, we didn't hear it.
That's not allowed in this house, but the two dogs are more than welcome.
I know, right? My dog's laid out here like he has a job. I'm like, you need to get a job, sir. You're eating up all of our food. I want to thank you guys for coming on, for being such a great sport. This is super duper helpful. We will send this out for the next month to our readers, and just the comments were really, really positive. Any last parting words? How can people get in contact with you if they have not clicked on the article yet to read it? Do you want to put it in the chat? How can they find out more about you and you guys and your work?
I think email is generally the easiest way. So we can put that
on the front of the article. Our email addresses are on that, which is a great way to do it. But
Yes, I would say that's the best. And we're both at Boise State. So
Yeah.
I'm the only Katherine Wright, and he's the only Keith TD at Boise State. So.
Thank you guys. We really appreciate you. Readers, please leave your comments. Please email them. And hopefully you'll be able to take some of this evidence that they found to help you in your classroom this week. So thank you guys.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.